I leaned back in my leather chair, a smirk playing on my lips as my so-called friends roared with laughter around the poker table. The air reeked of whiskey and expensive cigars, the scent of arrogance filling the dimly lit private club. "You're bluffing, Damien." Victor, my childhood friend turned rival, sneered, his voice laced with drunken amusement. "You don't have it in you." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, locking eyes with him. "Care to put your money where your mouth is?" He leaned forward, the glint of a challenge in his eyes. "All right, I bet you can't marry someone beneath you. A nobody. Someone who has nothing." A cruel smirk tugged at my lips. "And what do I get if I win?" Victor grinned. $1 million. No prenup. You have to stay married for at least 6 months. The room fell silent. $1 million was pocket change to me, but the thrill of the challenge, of proving I could control anyone, was worth far more. "Deal," I said, shaking his hand. That was the moment I sealed my fate. The next day, I strode into my mansion, scanning the servants like they were mere objects. My gaze landed on her, Ava. She was new, barely a week into the job. Petite, with sun-kissed skin and wide brown eyes that screamed innocence. She kept her head down, scrubbing the marble floor as if her life depended on it. "Her," I said to my butler. Ava froze, lifting her head slightly, confusion flickering across her face. "She's the one I'll marry." The butler looked horrified. "Sir, she's just—" "I wasn't asking for your opinion." My tone was sharp. Ava stood, wiping her hands on her apron, her brows knitting together. "Sir?" I approached her, my smirk never wavering. "How would you like to change your life overnight?" She hesitated. "I don't understand." "You will. You're going to be my wife." Her eyes widened, shock evident. "Excuse me?" I leaned in. "You heard me. You'll be well taken care of, and in return you'll do as I say." She looked at me like I was insane. "I know. I can't." My patience thinned. "You're struggling, aren't you? Living paycheck to paycheck? Your little brother's hospital bills aren't going to pay themselves." Her lips parted, her breath catching. I had her attention now. Ava clenched her fists, her gaze darting between me and the grand chandelier overhead, as if weighing the cost of her soul. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged. "Just stay married to me for 6 months. You get money, your brother gets treatment, and you walk away free." Her jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" I leaned in, letting my voice drop to a low whisper. "Then I find someone else. And you'll still be stuck here, struggling, watching your brother suffer." She swallowed hard. This isn't right. Neither is life. But here we are. Minutes passed. Then, finally, she whispered, "I'll do it." I smiled. Good girl. The wedding was rushed, a cold and calculated event. Ava wore a beautiful white dress, but her eyes were empty. She didn't smile. She didn't even look at me. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," she flinched. I didn't kiss her. Not because I cared, but because her disgust amused me. The moment the ceremony ended, I leaned in. "Remember, Ava, you're mine now." She looked away. The air was thick with tension as I shut the bedroom door behind me. Ava stood stiffly by the window, her back to me. "Get this over with," she said coldly. I chuckled. "You think I'm that predictable?" She turned, anger flickering in her gaze. "Isn't that what this is? A sick game to you?" I approached her slowly. "You really think I'd force myself on a woman who despises me?" Her lips parted, confusion replacing anger. I smirked. "We don't have to be a real couple, sweetheart. This is just a contract." Her shoulders sagged with relief, but something else flashed in her eyes. Suspicion. And then, she whispered, "You're going to regret this, Damien." For the first time, something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. Days passed, and Ava played her role perfectly. She smiled at events, held my hand in public, and fooled everyone into believing we were madly in love. But behind closed doors, she was different. She was cold, distant, and strangely calculating. I told myself it didn't matter. I was in control, or so I thought. One evening, I walked into my study and found Ava on my laptop. My blood turned to ice. "What are you doing?" She looked up, calm. "Just curious." I snatched the laptop away. "Stay out of my business." She smiled, an eerie, knowing smile. Of course, that was the first time I truly felt unsettled. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Ava. She wasn't like the other women I'd toyed with. Her silence was too calculated. Her compliance too smooth. She never argued, never resisted. Instead, she watched, listened, as if waiting. Then there was the laptop incident. The way she had been sitting in my chair, scrolling through my financial records like she had every right to be there. It sent a chill down my spine. "Stay out of my business," I had warned. And she had smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a guilty one. A knowing smile. I dismissed it at first. Maybe she was just curious. Maybe she was overwhelmed by the wealth she had suddenly been thrust into. But then I started noticing other things. Late at night, I'd find her in the library, flipping through business books. When I walked in, she'd shut them quickly, offering some excuse about wanting to understand my world better. My bank account showed small, unexplainable discrepancies. Not enough to sound the alarm, but just enough to make me feel like something was slipping through my fingers. And then one night, I overheard her on the phone. I had walked past her bedroom door, left slightly ajar, and her hushed voice stopped me in my tracks. "It's happening sooner than we thought," she murmured. I stiffened. "No, he doesn't suspect a thing," she continued. Every nerve in my body went cold. Was she talking about me? Before I could push open the door and demand answers, she ended the call. I stepped back into the shadows just as she opened the door, walking out casually, like she hadn't just made my blood turn to ice. She didn't see me, and for the first time since our sham of a marriage began, I felt something unfamiliar slither into my gut. Fear. The call ended, but the weight of those words lingered like a noose tightening around my throat. Fraud. Investigation. My empire, the one I built with ruthless efficiency, was under attack. I turned to Ava, who sat calmly in the armchair, legs crossed, sipping from a glass of wine like none of this concerned her. "You did something," I hissed, stepping toward her. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she swirled the wine in her glass, watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. "Why do you assume I had anything to do with it?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. I clenched my fists. "Because I know when I'm being played." Her lips curled into a smirk, but there was something dangerous in her eyes. "Maybe the game is just beginning, Damien." That was when I realized I was no longer in control. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. My PR team, my board members, my lawyers, everyone was panicked. Someone had leaked sensitive information about my company's finances to the press. Fraud, embezzlement, corruption. I had enemies, sure, but none who would risk such a well-orchestrated attack. Then it hit me. Ava. I stormed into the dining hall where she was calmly sipping coffee, her face the picture of innocence. "You did this," I accused, slamming my hands on the table. She didn't even blink. "Why would I sabotage my own husband's company?" I glared at her. "Cut the act." Ava set down her cup, folding her hands neatly on the table. "Damien, if you're losing control, maybe you should consider that your enemies have finally caught up with you. Not everything revolves around me." Her voice was so measured, so unreadable, that for a moment I questioned myself. But deep down I knew she was behind this, and I had underestimated her. The situation escalated faster than I could contain it. By noon, every major news outlet was running stories about my alleged financial crimes. Investigative reporters dug through my business records, twisting facts, painting me as the villain. My legal team scrambled to do damage control, but the leaks were too precise, too well-timed. It wasn't just a smear campaign, this was an orchestrated attack. And my gut told me Ava was at the center of it. But how? She was just a maid a few months ago. A nobody. Someone with no resources, no power. How the hell was she pulling this off? I needed answers. That night, I ordered my most trusted investigator, Collins, to dig into her past. I want everything, I told him. Every address, every relative, every person she's ever known. I want to know who she really is. Collins nodded. I'll have a full report in 24 hours. I clenched my jaw as he walked out. Ava had secrets, and I was going to uncover every single one of them. I didn't go to bed that night. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I sat in my office, replaying every interaction with Ava in my head, every calculated smile, every lingering glance. She had played me like a damn violin. Around 2 a.m., I heard soft footsteps outside my study. I turned my chair slowly, my heart pounding. The door creaked open, and there she was, dressed in a silk nightgown, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She looked unfazed. Still working? She murmured, leaning against the doorframe. I narrowed my eyes. What do you want? She tilted her head, her lips curling into a smile. To check on my husband, of course. I scoffed. You really expect me to believe that? She walked into the room, her bare feet soundless against the polished floor. Believe whatever you want, Damien. But you look tired. I gritted my teeth. You don't get to pretend you care. She moved closer, her fingers tracing the edge of my desk. You're always so quick to assume I'm the enemy. I clenched my fists. Aren't you? Ava leaned in, her face just inches from mine. Her scent, vanilla and something darker, something intoxicating, filled the space between us. And then she whispered, you should be more worried about the real enemy. A shiver ran down my spine. She straightened and walked away, leaving me staring after her, drowning in the suffocating realization that I had no idea who I had married. The next morning, Collins delivered his report. I ripped open the file, my hands shaking as I flipped through the pages. And then my blood ran cold. Ava Thompson didn't exist. There were no birth records, no official documents, no school records before the age of 15. She had appeared out of nowhere. I scanned further, my eyes locking onto a faded newspaper clipping. Tech billionaire's family killed in arson attack. Survivor missing. I froze. The article was over a decade old, but as I stared at the grainy photograph of the teenage girl in the corner of the page, I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Ava. Her real name was Isabel Carter, daughter of Matthew Carter, the man my company had ruined. And the girl who had disappeared after her family was murdered in what had been ruled an accidental fire. Except now I knew better. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. And Ava had married me for one reason. Revenge. I slammed the file shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. She had played the long game, infiltrated my world, married me, earned my trust, and now she was dismantling me from the inside out. A slow clap echoed behind me. I turned sharply. Ava stood in the doorway, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on her lips. Impressive, isn't it? She mused. How easily you let me in. I gritted my teeth. You set this up from the beginning. She stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You destroyed my father. You took everything from him. I clenched my fists. Business is business. Her expression darkened. And revenge is revenge. She leaned in, her voice a whisper of ice. This isn't even the worst of it, Damien. I haven't finished with you yet. A chill crawled down my spine. I had built an empire on power and control. And now, I was the one being played. And I had never felt so helpless. The next 48 hours were a nightmare. Every asset I owned was frozen. My stocks plummeted. My investors withdrew. I was under federal investigation. And through it all, Ava watched with a quiet satisfaction. I tried to fight back. I called in every favor, pulled every string. But it was no use. Every door slammed shut in my face. Every ally abandoned me. Ava hadn't just come for revenge. She had made sure there was no way out. And then, on the third night, she came to me one final time. She wore a black dress, her hair cascading in loose waves. She looked radiant, victorious. You lost, she said simply. I exhaled sharply, my hands trembling with barely restrained rage. So this was your plan all along? To destroy me? She smiled. No, Damien. My plan was to make you feel what my father felt. The helplessness, the ruin. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Because the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that she had won. Completely. She left that night. Filed for divorce the next morning. And when the news broke, the world cheered for her. Ava Carter, the woman who had outplayed the devil himself. As I sat in the ruins of my empire, I realized something. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And I had never stood a chance. The days blurred into weeks. The world I had once controlled slipped through my fingers like grains of sand. My empire was gone. My wealth seized. My reputation tarnished beyond repair. Every newspaper, every media outlet painted Ava as the heroine, the woman who brought down a corrupt billionaire. And me? I was the villain in my own story. The walls of my mansion, once filled with luxury and power, now echoed with emptiness. Staff resigned, friends vanished, and my so-called allies refused to take my calls. Even Victor, the man who had dared me to marry her, laughed when I reached out. Damn, Damien, he chuckled. You really let her destroy you. I gritted my teeth, my knuckles white as I clutched the phone. I need a loan, Victor snorted. You think I'd risk my money on you? Face it, Damien. You're finished. The line went dead. And for the first time in my life, I had no way out. The mansion was the last thing to go. I stood in the grand foyer watching as strangers, people I once looked down upon, walked through my home, bidding on my belongings like vultures picking apart a corpse. The leather chairs, the priceless artwork, the cars, everything that once screamed power was being stripped away. And then I saw her, Ava. She stood at the entrance, wearing a sleek black dress, watching the auction unfold with a glass of champagne in hand. I clenched my fists. Here to gloat. She smirked. Just making sure you get what you deserve. I took a step closer, my voice low. You ruined me. She tilted her head. No, Damien. You ruined yourself. Her words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. And then, in the cruelest twist of fate, she raised a paddle. 30 million, she bid. The auctioneer's gavel slammed. And just like that, my mansion, my home, belonged to her. With nowhere to go, I found myself in the one place I had never imagined. A cheap motel. The sheets were stained. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and regret. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cracked mirror, at the reflection of a man I no longer recognized. Damien Crawford, the ruthless billionaire, was gone. All that remained was a broken man with nothing left. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have nothing. The same way Ava had all those years ago. A knock on my motel door dragged me from my thoughts. I opened it expecting debt collectors, journalists, hell, maybe even the police. But it was Ava. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes scanning the miserable excuse of a room. Fitting, she murmured. I scowled. Why are you here? Haven't you humiliated me enough? She crossed her arms. I have an offer for you. I let out a bitter laugh. An offer? From the woman who destroyed me. She nodded. That's right. I narrowed my eyes. What's the catch? Ava smirked. You'll find out soon enough. And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there. Confused, wary, and more intrigued than I cared to admit. I arrived at the address she sent me the next morning. It wasn't an office. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a restaurant. Fancy one, sure, but still a restaurant. Ava was waiting for me inside, seated at a corner table, sipping coffee like she hadn't just single-handedly destroyed my entire life. I sat across from her, my jaw tight. What is this? She slid a contract across the table. A job, she said simply. I glanced at the paper and felt my stomach twist. A manager position, at a restaurant, one she now owned. I scoffed. You expect me to work for you? She raised an eyebrow. Unless you prefer to stay in that rat-infested motel? I clenched my fists, my pride warring with the brutal reality of my situation. This was humiliating. Power move. But I had no other options. Fine, I muttered. Ava smiled. Good boy. And just like that, the tables had truly turned. My first day as a restaurant manager was hell. The staff barely respected me. The customers treated me like a glorified servant. And Ava? She watched with amusement. I scrubbed dishes, took orders, dealt with rude customers, the kind of people I used to look down on. And with every passing day, the weight of my past arrogance settled heavier on my shoulders. I had spent my life treating people like they were beneath me. Now I was beneath everyone. And maybe, just maybe, I deserved it. One evening, after closing, I found Ava sitting alone in her office. She looked different, tired, almost vulnerable. I hesitated before stepping inside. "Why did you give me this job?" She glanced up, her expression unreadable. "Would you rather I left you on the streets?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't get it. You hate me. You won. So why this?" She exhaled slowly. "Because I wanted you to understand." "Understand what?" She met my gaze. "What it feels like to be powerless." Her words sank deep into my bones. And for the first time, I didn't argue, because I finally understood. Weeks passed, and something strange happened. I got used to the work. I learned the names of the staff. I listened to their stories. And for the first time in my life, I respected them. I had spent my entire life thinking wealth made a person valuable. But I had been wrong. Damn wrong. One night, I found Ava alone on the restaurant's balcony. I stepped beside her, staring at the city skyline. I never said it, I admitted. She glanced at me. "Said what?" I swallowed. "I'm sorry." Her expression shifted just slightly. "I hurt you," I continued. "I destroyed your family. I never thought about the lives I ruined." She was silent for a long time. Then, finally, she whispered, "Do you regret it?" I exhaled. "Every damn day." She studied me for a moment. And then, for the first time since I met her, Ava looked unsure, like she hadn't expected me to change. But I had. Ava didn't say anything after my apology. She just looked at me. Really looked at me. As if trying to decide whether I was lying or if the man before her was truly different from the one who had destroyed her life. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I finally said. I needed to say it." Ava exhaled softly, her gaze shifting to the city skyline. "I spent years dreaming of this moment," she admitted. "Of watching you fall, of seeing you suffer the way my father did. And now?" I asked. She hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she whispered, "I don't know." For the first time, she seemed unsure of her victory. And that scared me more than anything. The next day, I arrived at the restaurant early, but something was wrong. Ava wasn't there. She was never late, never absent. My gut twisted. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. And then, as I stepped into her office, I saw it. A note. "They know." I had to go. My blood ran cold. Who was they? Had someone connected the dots about what she had done? And if they had, was she in danger? For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about her, the woman who had taken everything from me. And yet, all I could think about was how to find her. I called Collins, my old investigator. "I need you to track someone for me." Collins chuckled darkly. "Thought you were broke, Crawford." I clenched my jaw. "I'll find a way to pay you. Just do it." An hour later, he called back. "She's at a motel on the outskirts of the city." "But Damien," he hesitated. "She's not alone." My stomach twisted. I didn't wait. I jumped into my car and drove like a man possessed. The motel was run down, the kind of place where secrets festered. I pushed open the door to Ava's room without knocking. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring up at a man I didn't recognize. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in a dark suit. The moment I stepped inside, the man turned. I knew his type immediately. Dangerous. Ava's eyes widened. "Damien, what the hell are you doing here?" I ignored her. My gaze locked onto the man. "Who are you?" The man smirked. "I should be asking you the same." Ava stepped between us. "Stop. Both of you." Her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. I turned to her. "Who is he?" Ava exhaled. He's the reason I was able to take you down. My blood went cold. She wasn't working alone. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was the only one who had been played. The man crossed his arms. I'm here to collect. Ava. Ava stiffened. I need more time. I frowned. Collect what? The man's smirk widened. Revenge has a price. Realization crashed into me like a tidal wave. Ava hadn't done this on her own. She had help. And now she was in over her head. For the first time since this twisted game began, the tables had turned again. And despite everything, despite the hatred, the betrayal, I felt something I never expected. The need to protect her. Whatever you owe, I said. Stepping forward, I'll pay it. Ava's breath hitched. The man raised an eyebrow. You sure about that, Crawford? I met his gaze. Try me. For the first time, Ava looked at me not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. And just like that, our war wasn't over. It had only just begun.